just rewatched The Thing like 2 days ago, and it's
Oh
still a
yeah,
perfect movie.
it's my favorite horror movie, hands down. I
Yeah.
just love it so much.
I did actually double bill with Weapons. I hadn't seen
Uh,
Weapons yet, and that fucking blew me away. I loved it. I don't know how you felt about it, but
I love Weapons too. I mean, I'm a big fan of Zach Kreger. He did Barbarian previously.
yep, yep.
I just love all these sketch comedy guys
I
like getting
know.
into horror. They're just so good at it for some reason.
Yeah, I don't get it, but there's some formula there.
So yeah, just the knowing how to heighten. I think like comedic timing and horror timing are very
Yeah,
intertwined.
totally.
To talk about your movie, the AI doc coming out in theaters March 27th. I had a chance to see it at South by Southwest, and the person who introduced it mentioned how they had received a lot of submissions for documentaries about AI that year, and that yours was the best. And curious if you are aware that making a doc about AI would become a saturated market, and what you tried to do at the beginning to make it stand apart from all of these others.
I mean, it was a really lame, lazy joke throughout making the film. Whenever, cross paths with someone, they say, "What are you working on?" "Oh, I'm making a documentary." "What's it about?" And we would often just say, like, kind of cynically, "Well, it's the same movie everyone else is making right now. It's a film about AI." And so we were hyper aware that it was a subject that was going to be, covered by many filmmakers, and that was okay. It's a subject that does need a lot of stories, and it's a subject that does need a lot of kind of coverage from many different viewpoints, different angles, different perspectives. So I'm all for that. I don't see that as a bad thing, and I don't, it's definitely a challenge in the film festival landscape because there is going to be a saturation there that is going to make it difficult to, I don't want to say stand out, but there's only so many slots in film festivals, and you know, it's just something to consider. But that is partly a big reason why we leaned into the story that we did, which was a specific personal POV through my co-director and the film's protagonist, Daniel Rower, and this lens of fatherhood and this lens of what world am I bringing my kid into. The goal is just be okay. Let's be open, earnest, and sincere with how we look at this topic, and let's you know be self-aware with what we don't know and what kind of questions we want to ask. And Daniel is a really great proxy for the audience in that he does ask a lot of things that people would probably want to ask. So yeah, that's kind of where it all started, actually.
And Daniel's sort of the face of the film as well as being a co-director. Was there a clear split in your responsibilities? Did he have certain things he did in terms of behind the cameras? Did you do certain things? How did you manage that?
It was it evolved every day. For the most part, Daniel was, as you saw in the film, he was the one on set conducting the interviews. I was on set with kind of all the animation, and then those were both kind of our places where we broke off a bit. But then the back end, the edits, the outline, the stories that we wanted to pursue, that was really just a shared task, also inclusive of the rest of the team, the film's producers and the editors and our story editor, Joseph Beebe. And um, yeah, it was kind of just this constant spinning plates thing. And sometimes we would take turns doing one specific thing, and then sometimes we were just both in and drilled down on something together. So it was crazy. It was my first time co-directing, but it was also lots of fun and very challenging. But it's just something that we didn't really have time to think about what we wanted the process to be. We kind of just went in feet first with what had to get done.
And I read that the original plan was to film over the course of a year, and then it wound up taking 3 years. So I can't even imagine how much footage you had to sort through. Where do you
Yeah,
even start finding the narrative through line of what eventually became the AI doc?
a lot of research, a lot of you know, bringing ourselves up to speed on the subject, doing initial conversations and pre-interviews with subjects, and getting a sense of the landscape, and then just getting a camera on the ground and getting an interview subject in front of them and talking to them. And then sometimes one subject would lead to the next, and then sometimes one subject would lead to a category of story that we would pursue, and it was just this big ball of clay that we just kind of kept collectively molding into something as we went. So as confusing as that sounds, is as confusing as it was. It was a feel through the dark process.
Sure. And you interview dozens of people throughout the doc, some of whom have worked for AI companies or presently work for AI companies who might have a financial stake in how it's perceived by the general public. What was your vetting process like, finding the people you could be confident would give you as straight and narrow of their perception of AI as possible
Yeah.
without trying to market it?
A lot of the credit there is our producer Ted Tremper, who, if someone was in the film, Ted probably read everything that they ever wrote and was like watched and listened to every single podcast they ever participated in, found everything that they ever said publicly, and digested it all to determine, if this person was, to use an old-fashioned phrase, like on the level, and also to see if they had something that they can contribute to the film's narrative, and to do it in a way, to your point, that wasn't just them promoting something, them trying to get a specific product out there. Um, yeah, and some of that seeps in when you interview a subject. Sometimes they note that they did something and they name drop, but then we're not making an ad here for anything, so that's all can be solved in the edit sometimes, frankly.
Yeah. And one thing I was impressed with the film is how relevant it feels because AI is still this changing, evolving thing. I mean, at any point during production, I imagine they could have just discovered AGI and that would completely upend what kind of the thing is about. So, did you have rules about what you wanted to focus on, or how did you go about achieving this evergreen vibe for the film?
It wasn't really rules, other than the only real rule that we learned early on when Sam Altman was ousted by his board and then brought back in like 48 hours or 72 hours later, was we knew that we couldn't be reactionary to stories as they happened in real time, because we could have made a film about that, and then how relevant would that film be today? Not at all. Um, so we knew that we had to take kind of a big step back and find the most evergreen version of the story. And then the only other kind of part of the process that was kind of a non-rule rule was just trying things out. And, our editors, we would have full sequences and scenes that, would have speak to certain aspects of the AI landscape that, when that was fit into a series of sequences, we'd be like, that doesn't belong here. That does, let's pull that out or let's put it back in. So it was really kind of a trial by fire to just keep trying things out, and then there's a certain point where, like, we could have continued making this film forever. This could have been a never ending and constantly evolving story, but there you get to a certain point where you go, this is the story, and this is the story that we want to tell, and we decided on that collectively, and then that's when we take our hands off the steering wheel, and it's up to the audience at that point, what it does.
Were there any sequences that at one point during production you were like, this is going to be a centerpiece of the film, but for whatever reason, maybe it just didn't become relevant? It had to get cut to make a more cohesive story?
Well, the one sequence that I felt strongest about, that I knew was going to be important in the film, was I know this isn't really answering your question, but was the conversation with his parents.
Mm.
Um, I knew that if we were presenting that much anxiety and that much um, kind of inner turmoil of Daniel throughout the film, that we had to go somewhere. And so from, I think it was a month or two into the production, because Daniel was recording phone calls with his parents, and that conversation happened. I was like, I know that this belongs in the film, and I'll be light touch with that. Like, if it has to cut, it will go, and I'll be really really sad. But I knew in my gut that sequence was going to be important to the film. Um, Now, what were there other sequences that were in there that we cut? I mean, goodness, we tried, I think, 10 different endings. There are endings I definitely felt strongly about. I'm not sure if I felt more strongly about them than the ending that we ended up with. But this really was a collective effort. The film I would have made solo would have been very different from the film Daniel would have made solo, and Kwan and Ted, and so this was really a microcosm of, you know, how people have to come together and we have to make these decisions together and find a shape that works for more than just one individual.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. AI Doc comes out in theaters later this week. Is there something else you have in the works now?
You know, I put another project on hiatus to do this one, and I'm hoping to pick it back up, and we'll see how that goes. So yeah, and then other than that, I'm going to just enjoy my time with my kid, you know, who was born during the making of this film. So back to life.